Is that cake shop really that big of a deal? I asked curiously. It seems so. Well then, it must be worth a lot of money. Megan, my mother-in-law, replied with a nasty grin spreading across her face. My husband Brian chuckled in agreement. We've got Dad's will, so now we can live it up in luxury. But doesn't Nicole have a will too? Megan questioned, raising an eyebrow. Brian scoffed, holding up a white envelope. What, this thing about leaving the cake shop to her? It's nothing, we can just toss it out of the envelope. He proceeded to rip the envelope to shreds and discard it carelessly. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I had never been legally adopted by my father-in-law, Joseph. Therefore, I had no rightful claim to his inheritance. If Megan and Brian took all of Joseph's assets for themselves, I probably would have accepted it without complaint. However, I could not tolerate them blatantly disregarding Joseph's final wishes. And on top of that, all they cared about was the money. If money was so important to them, then they should just keep treasuring it until the very end. When that money eventually ran out, maybe then they would finally realize the magnitude of what they had lost. I quietly turned my back on the two of them in the living room. My name is Nicole. This year marks my 40th birthday, a milestone age. And in my life, I find myself standing at a major crossroads. The truth is, I'm currently agonizing over whether or not to get a divorce. Brian and I got married over a decade ago. We don't have any children, but I wouldn't say our relationship is bad. However, if you asked me if I still love Brian, I'd honestly have a hard time answering. Brian doesn't cheat on me, and he's diligent in his work. It's just that he's hopelessly irresponsible when it comes to money. And whenever he's in a bind, he goes running to Joseph for help. I wish he'd stop relying on his parents like a child and act more like a grown adult. Whenever I try to scold Brian about this, Megan always jumps to his defense. Don't you dare lecture him in that high and mighty tone? She snaps at me condescendingly. I wonder what Brian will do once Joseph is gone. Watching Joseph lying in his hospital bed, I let out a quiet sigh. But arguing with Brian about money is nothing new. To be honest, I had sensed a difference in our attitudes towards money long before, with Brian. In fact, from the very beginning when we first met, I had doubts about the way Brian spent his money. For example, there was this one time before we got married when the two of us went to a shopping mall together. In front of a luxury brand store inside the mall, Brian suddenly stopped in his tracks. What's wrong? I asked, curious about his sudden halt. Oh, it's just that there's this watch I've been wanting, he replied, pointing to a glass display case at the store's entrance. Inside the case sat an array of high-end watches. $4,000! Isn't that a bit expensive? I exclaimed, my eyes widening at the exorbitant price tag. Brian scoffed, brushing off my concerns. What are you talking about? That's practically a bargain. It was true that when it came to luxury watches, it wasn't uncommon for prices to exceed $10,000. However, at the time, we were both in our mid-20s. Not to mention, we were trying to save money in preparation for our upcoming wedding. I tried to reason with him. Even after we get married, we'll both still be working for a while, right? Once we start living together, we'll have more financial flexibility soon enough. It would be easier to save money compared to when we were living alone. It was better to wait until we had the extra leeway before making such a purchase. That was how I attempted to persuade him. But Brian simply frowned, unconvinced by my argument. I need to buy it now, or else, he insisted stubbornly. Can't you endure just a little bit longer? Please? I pleaded with him. We ended up discussing it in front of the store for about 30 minutes. Finally, Brian reluctantly gave in. Needless to say, I breathed a sigh of relief. I had planned to continue working even after getting married, so I wasn't too worried about running short on living expenses even if we splurged a little. Still, it went without saying that it was better to avoid any unnecessary spending. Brian seemed to accept my way of thinking. I was convinced that with this mindset, we would manage just fine after tying the knot. However, on the day right before our wedding ceremony, we were in our new home where we would begin our life together, unpacking boxes after the move. That's when I opened a cardboard box and unexpectedly discovered an unfamiliar shopping bag inside. "This is Brian's?" I asked, holding up the mysterious bag. "Yeah, that's right. Could you take it to the bedroom for me? I'm going to install the fridge," Brian replied nonchalantly. "Got it," I agreed, carrying the bag towards Brian's study. However, as I walked, a strange uneasiness settled in my chest. "Wait, was that a luxury brand?" I muttered to myself, the image from earlier flashing through my mind. The shopping bag had the logo of a famous international brand printed on it. Of course, I wouldn't get angry at Brian for owning luxury items. If anything, since Brian worked in sales at a trading company, I wanted him to maintain a neat appearance. But for some reason, it bothered me this time. So, feeling guilty, I decided to check the contents of the bag. "Ah, this is..." I gasped as I pulled out a high-end wristwatch from inside. It was the same one we had seen at the shopping mall. I immediately confronted Brian about it. Flustered, Brian started making excuses. "My boss told me to wear a nice watch, so I had no choice but to buy it," he claimed, avoiding eye contact. "Then why didn't you discuss it with me first?" I demanded, my brows furrowing. "Well, it's a work thing, so..." He trailed off weakly. He didn't think it was something he needed to consult me about. He knew it was wrong of him to buy it without telling me. Brian spouted off these flimsy justifications. Naturally, I was furious. But there was no point in complaining about it now. In the end, I simply said, "Next time, talk to me about it first," and left it at that. However, even after that incident, Brian continued to make big purchases without my knowledge. If he kept that up, I should have noticed at some point. But I never did. Because Brian's methods were clever and deceptive. What shocked me the most was discovering that Brian had been receiving an allowance from Joseph. Whenever he ran out of money, he would ask Joseph to spot him some cash. It goes without saying that a grown adult shouldn't be doing that. If I had known, I would have put a stop to it. But I only found out about it much, much later. A year ago, when Joseph was hospitalized for an illness, I learned of it while talking to him on his sickbed. Come to think of it, when Brian heard about Joseph's hospitalization, he seemed quite distraught. "What? Dad's in the hospital!" Brian exclaimed loudly as he spoke on the phone with Megan. "Joseph's been hospitalized?" I asked Brian, and he nodded at me while still talking to Megan. "So, how's his condition?" I inquired, unable to hear the other side of the conversation but sensing the severity of the situation. Eventually, Brian ended the call and turned to face me. Hesitantly, he said, "I'm sorry, but I think I should go back to my parents' place." "You're right. That's probably for the best." I agreed, understanding his concern. "No, that's not what I meant. I want to live with my mom at their house," he clarified, his words catching me off guard. Certainly, with Joseph's absence, I was worried about Megan. However, the idea of moving in with my in-laws seemed like too sudden of a development. As I silently pondered what to do, Brian began explaining his reasons for wanting to live together. Brian was the only child of his parents, so if things continued like this, Megan would end up alone. Additionally, Joseph ran a cake shop, and even while hospitalized, there would be a need to communicate with the store. But Megan had very little work experience, and it was doubtful that she could properly assist with the business. Therefore, it would be better for either Brian or me to lend a helping hand. Brian shared all of these thoughts with me.
But what about work?
I asked, knowing that if we both moved in with his parents, we would have no choice but to quit our jobs. That wouldn't solve the problem at hand. Just as I was thinking this, Brian continued with a smile. "It's okay. I'll put in a request for a transfer," he assured me.
A transfer?
"Yeah, my company has a branch office near my parents' house," he explained. The trading company Brian worked for had several branch offices throughout the country. Apparently, one of them was located close to his parents' home. If he transferred there, he wouldn't have to quit his job. Brian shared this information with me.
But it's impossible for me,
I pointed out.
"Right. Your company is..."
He trailed off, realizing the predicament. My company only had the headquarters where I currently worked. His parents' house was too far away for me to commute. That being said, Joseph had always been kind to me from the moment we first met. I wanted to repay his kindness before it was too late, and I regretted not doing so. After much contemplation, I made the decision to quit my job. Brian, on the other hand, submitted a transfer request to his company. Fortunately, his transfer to the branch office near his parents' house was approved. Meanwhile, I left my job and began helping out Joseph. That's when Joseph said something unexpected to me. "Nicole, if you're interested, how about becoming an employee at our company?"
"What? Me?"
I asked, taken aback by his offer.
"Yeah, it wouldn't be right to have you work without pay. If you become an employee, I can give you a salary,"
he explained with a warm smile. It was an offer too good to pass up. I immediately accepted his proposal. Subsequently, I was hired as a mid-career employee at Joseph's cake shop. Megan wasn't too thrilled about the idea, but when I told her I would take care of Joseph, she reluctantly nodded in agreement. And so, I embarked on a new beginning at Joseph's cake shop. Once I started working there, I realized it was an even better workplace than I had imagined. There were talented pastry chefs and many kind-hearted individuals. The cake shop is such a wonderful place. "Why didn't you take over the business, Brian?" I asked him shortly after I began working there. Logically, Brian should have been the successor. However, he had chosen to work for a trading company instead. Apparently, he had no intention of inheriting the cake shop. It was something we had discussed before getting married, but actually working there made me wonder why he didn't want to take over the store. "The cake shop isn't cool at all. It doesn't seem to make much money either," Brian remarked nonchalantly.
"What? Not cool? Not profitable?"
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Yeah, I've been to the store a few times, but there are hardly any customers," he continued, but I couldn't process the rest of his words. In essence, his reasons seemed to be that the shop wasn't stylish enough and didn't appear to be lucrative. I couldn't believe he thought of Joseph's work in such a way. I felt my affection for Brian instantly grow cold. This incident occurred about a year ago. Since then, while discussing work with Joseph, I learned that he had been giving money to Brian. However, Joseph added that it was an old story. When I asked him how long ago it was, Joseph simply laughed.
"It hasn't happened in the past few years. He probably wanted to impress you since you had just gotten married,"
Joseph explained with a knowing smile. It seemed that Brian had told Joseph he bought the luxury items to show off to me. Although the stories didn't quite match up, I didn't say anything to avoid burdening Joseph. Some time later, Joseph's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. Gradually, it became difficult for him to even hold a conversation. Amidst all of this, Joseph made a certain request of me.
So, could I ask you to do that for me?
He inquired, his voice weak but hopeful.
I don't mind at all, but are you sure?
I asked, wanting to confirm his intentions.
Yeah. Recently, I've started to understand a lot of things just by the atmosphere.
Joseph replied, chuckling contentedly. That was the last proper conversation I had with Joseph. A few days later, he lost the ability to speak. I told Megan and Brian that I wanted them to come visit Joseph.
What? Visit him? I'm too busy for that.
Megan dismissed the idea coldly. I couldn't fathom what she could be so busy with. In any case, Megan refused to visit Joseph. Brian also claimed he couldn't go see Joseph because of work.
Don't say that. This might be the last chance.
I pleaded, my heart sinking.
I know, but it's for work.
Brian responded with a casual attitude. I was utterly furious. In a situation like this, I could understand why Joseph had made that request to me. I had completely lost patience with Brian. This was something I needed to consider divorce over. I began contemplating the idea of leaving Brian. Around that time, Joseph passed away. My mind went blank. There were still so many things I wanted to discuss with Joseph. I couldn't let it end like this. Pushing my emotions aside, I started preparing for Joseph's funeral. David, one of Joseph's subordinates and a talented pastry chef from the cake shop, came to help. However, for some reason, David and Megan started arguing.
What? Why would you make it so extravagant?
Megan scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain.
Well, many people from the shop and other related parties will be attending.
David tried to explain patiently.
Just keep it simple. The shop isn't paying for the funeral expenses, are they?
Megan snapped back. It seemed they were clashing over the scale of the funeral. Megan wanted to keep it modest to reduce costs. On the other hand, David insisted that they should make it a larger event considering the number of attendees.
There are other expenses to worry about, and it's already a burden. Surely you understand that much?
Megan argued, her frustration mounting.
I do understand, but we're expecting a large turnout.
David countered, standing his ground.
What? But that's not what we had in mind.
Megan started, but I couldn't see the conversation going anywhere productive. Left with no choice, I intervened.
Megan, let me handle the funeral arrangements. Why don't you go rest over there?
I suggested, trying to defuse the situation.
What? You're treating me like I'm in the way.
Megan bristled, clearly offended.
You've been by Joseph's side for many years.
I began, attempting to reason with her. It was only natural for her to feel devastated. It would be best for her to take a break now. I tried to persuade Megan in this manner. In response, Megan turned to me with an irritated expression and declared,
Do whatever you want. But I'm not paying a cent more than what I've already prepared. I'll cover any shortfall.
I reassured her, hoping to ease the tension. Megan simply snorted in response. Brian, who was standing next to her, tried to calm Megan down while addressing me. Sorry, but can I leave that side of things to you? I'll take care of Mom. It was more convenient for me that way as well. With that in mind, I entrusted Megan to Brian's care. From then on, David and I proceeded with the funeral preparations. Thanks to our efforts, we were able to hold a dignified funeral ceremony. However, the decision to make the funeral a larger affair ended up backfiring. In addition to those related to the cake shop, many other people attended the funeral. Among them were individuals from local businesses and even politicians. Megan and Brian were taken aback by the sight of the attendees. As the funeral drew to a close, Brian approached me with a question.
"Hey, was Dad actually famous or something?"
he asked, his brows furrowed in confusion.
"Joseph was beloved by many people. And of course, the cake shop is well known too,"
I explained, a sad smile on my lips.
"I see. I had no idea,"
Brian murmured, his shoulders slumping slightly. He seemed a bit dejected. Perhaps he had finally realized his father's greatness. If he truly felt that way, maybe I wouldn't need to go through with the divorce after all. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I mourned the loss of Joseph. The day after the funeral, I headed to the cake shop to retrieve Joseph's belongings. At home, Megan and Brian were busy cleaning up after the funeral. When I returned, I would need to help out as well. Thinking this, I hurried back home.
"I'm back,"
I called out as I entered the house. But there was no response. Wondering what was going on, I made my way to the living room. That's when I overheard Megan and Brian's conversation coming from the room.
"There were some famous people among the attendees, weren't there?"
Megan remarked, a hint of surprise in her voice.
"Yeah, I was shocked to see the department head of one of our major client companies there,"
Brian replied with a sigh. Meanwhile, Megan continued with a frown.
"Could it be that the cake shop is actually a big deal?"
"It seems so," Brian agreed, nodding his head.
"Well then, it must be worth a lot of money,"
Megan said, a nasty grin spreading across her face. Brian responded with a smile of his own.
"We've already got Dad's will, so we can live a life of luxury from now on,"
he declared, a gleam in his eye.
"But doesn't Nicole have a will too?"
Megan asked, raising an eyebrow.
"What, this will about leaving the cake shop to her? This thing, we can just toss it out of the envelope,"
Brian scoffed, ripping the white envelope he held in his hands and discarding it. In that instant, something inside me snapped. I had never been legally adopted by Joseph. Therefore, I had no rightful claim to his inheritance. If Megan and Brian took all of Joseph's assets for themselves, I probably would have accepted it without complaint. However, I could not tolerate them blatantly disregarding Joseph's final wishes. And on top of that, all they cared about was the money. If money was so important to them, then they should just keep treasuring it until the very end. When that money eventually ran out, maybe then they would finally realize the magnitude of what they had lost. I quietly turned my back on the two of them in the living room. I headed straight to my own room. Making sure not to alert Megan and Brian, I discreetly gathered my belongings. Well, I only packed a few days' worth of clothes into a bag. Then, I placed the pre-filled divorce application and a memo that I had prepared a while ago on the table.
"This is goodbye,"
I whispered softly before quietly leaving the house. I made my way directly to a nearby cafe. There, I searched for a short-term apartment rental in the area. Luckily, I found a vacant room just a 10-minute drive away. Judging from what Megan and Brian had discussed, I might have to quit working at the cake shop. Even so, thanks to Joseph, I had some savings. I wouldn't have to worry about making ends meet for the time being. Moreover, the room I found was available for immediate move-in. So, I signed the lease on the spot. The following day, I moved into the apartment I had rented. First, I needed to get Brian to agree to the divorce. My revenge on the two of them would come later. Plus, I had to carry out what Joseph had entrusted me with.
"Joseph, leave it to me,"
I murmured, steeling my resolve. I was contemplating the timing of when to go retrieve the rest of my belongings, when I suddenly noticed several missed calls on my smartphone. There were about 30 calls in total from Megan and Brian. The calls were concentrated within the past few hours. I guess they had finally realized I was gone. As I pondered this, my smartphone abruptly started ringing. Hello? I answered the call, my voice cautious.
Ah, finally, you picked up. Where are you, Nicole?
Brian's loud voice made me wince instinctively. He continued firing off questions without pause.
You didn't come home last night, did you? Where are you and what are you doing?
It doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. We're getting a divorce, after all. I replied curtly.
What? A divorce?
Brian sounded genuinely shocked. That's right. I left a memo saying I wanted a divorce, remember? I placed it on the table along with the divorce application. I explained, my tone matter of fact. I could hear the sound of him rushing around on the other end of the line. Before long, Brian's high-pitched voice rang out in disbelief.
What the hell is this?
It's exactly what it looks like. I've had enough of you only caring about money, I stated bluntly.
I'm not. It's not like that,
Brian stammered, trying to make excuses. However, he was mumbling and I couldn't quite make out his words. What? You can't say it clearly because you're feeling guilty? I pressed, my patience wearing thin.
No. What about you, huh?
He retorted, his voice growing defensive. What about me? I shot back, my brows furrowing. Brian's breathing grew heavier as he continued accusingly.
You're saying all this, but you actually went to your lover's place, didn't you?
Huh? What are you talking about? I asked incredulously.
It has to be true. You suddenly left the house, and normally there's nowhere else for you to go.
Brian's voice rose in anger. I sighed heavily before responding. Sorry to disappoint, but I'm actually at a short-term apartment rental right now.
I can't believe this. When you came here, you quit your job, so you shouldn't have any money,
he exclaimed in disbelief.
I was helping out at Joseph's cake shop,
I countered, my frustration mounting. Both Brian and Megan were well aware that I had been assisting at Joseph's cake shop. In fact, it felt more like they had dumped the responsibility on me. Moreover, Megan had even made me take care of Joseph's nursing needs.
What? Were you getting an allowance from Dad or something?
Brian asked snidely. That was you, not me. I nearly blurted out those words in a burst of sarcasm. But now was not the time for such quips. I took a deep breath before continuing.
I was hired as an employee there. What did you say? You've got to be kidding me.
Brian scoffed, his tone dripping with skepticism.
It's not a joke. Joseph was kind enough to look out for me,
I asserted, my voice growing firm. Joseph had mentioned how he couldn't bear to burden his son's wife on top of being neglected by his own wife and biological son. In any case, Brian should have been able to understand that I had my own money now. Brian seemed to have lost his ability to persuade me the moment he realized I had my own money. As if to add insult to injury, I spoke with increased intensity.
Anyway, I want to divorce you, Brian. Are you going to sign the divorce papers or not? Which is it? No, this whole divorce thing.
He trailed off, his resistance weakening.
I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say unless you agree to sign the divorce papers,
I declared firmly, leaving no room for argument. Brian let out a frustrated sigh before muttering something under his breath. Then, he raised his voice louder than before.
Fine. I'll give you the divorce.
I just recorded you saying that. I informed him, a hint of triumph in my tone.
I'll sign the damn divorce papers, so just come back home. We can't move forward with the inheritance discussions without you here.
Brian finally blurted out his true intentions. However, there was one thing Brian had failed to realize. By saying that, he had inadvertently revealed the existence of a will from Joseph addressed to me. I'll say it again, but I'm not Joseph's biological daughter. Therefore, I'm not an heir to his estate. In other words, if the only purpose was to discuss the inheritance, there was absolutely no need for me to be present. Rather, the fact that they couldn't proceed without me implied that I was somehow involved in the inheritance process. He really is an idiot. I let out a quiet sigh. In any case, I had obtained proof that he would agree to the divorce. Moreover, Brian had no idea what consequences he would face. At best, he would come to regret his own words. A slight smile played on my lips at the thought. The following day, I visited my in-laws' house to retrieve the divorce application. Inside, I found Megan, Brian, and an unfamiliar man in a suit. According to Brian, the man was a lawyer. Apparently, they had called him over to discuss the inheritance matters.
If we're going to talk about the divorce, this is perfect timing,
Brian remarked, a smug expression on his face. I had intended to hire my own lawyer. But in a way, this worked out conveniently.
Well then, would you mind handling my divorce case as well, while you're at it?
I asked the lawyer, my tone polite but firm.
Yes, that won't be a problem.
The lawyer nodded with a smile. And so, the discussion about Joseph's inheritance began. Joseph's estate consisted of cash, securities, a house, and land. However, it seemed that Megan and Brian were the only heirs. If that were the case, there would be no need for further discussion. Normally, that would be true, but Megan and Brian had been entrusted with a will from Joseph addressed to me. That matter was likely the reason they had called the lawyer. Did they really want to pretend that the will meant for me didn't exist? I had my doubts, but the lawyer proceeded with the conversation matter-of-factly without saying a word.
So, I understand that you have a will in your possession,
he prompted, his gaze expectant.
Yes. Here it is,
Brian replied, placing 2 envelopes on the table. One had Megan's name on it, and the other had Brian's. The will addressed to me, which they had mentioned in that earlier conversation, was nowhere to be seen. It was to be expected, but I couldn't help feeling bitterly frustrated.
Have you seen the contents?
The lawyer inquired, turning the envelopes over in his hands.
Well, the seals weren't intact, so…
Brian trailed off, his expression slightly guilty.
I see. Let me verify the contents then,
the lawyer stated, proceeding to open the envelope addressed to Megan first. Inside was a single slip of paper. To you, I bequeath the house and land, it read, without specifying to whom it was addressed. However, Joseph's signature was clearly present. Similarly, the envelope addressed to Brian contained the same type of note. This one mentioned leaving the cash and securities to him, and it also bore Joseph's signature.
Oh, there's one more sheet here,
the lawyer remarked, noticing an additional document. It stated the following. Entrusting the cake shop to… He read aloud, his brow furrowing slightly.
Yes. My father ran a cake shop,
Brian explained, his tone casual.
So, you will be inheriting the shop. I see. Since there are also securities involved, that should work out nicely,
the lawyer commented, nodding in understanding. The lawyer was taking notes while talking. At that moment, Brian shot me a nasty look. Oh, how could he be so clueless? I had overheard their conversation. So I knew that this will was originally intended for me. But Brian didn't know I had heard them, so he just had to sit tight. If he did anything unnecessary, he would only make me suspicious. He couldn't hide his feeling of triumph. I sighed quietly to myself. For now, I pretended not to know anything and kept the conversation going. In the end, the inheritance was divided as per the will, and both of them inherited all of Joseph's assets. Also, Brian seemed quite inflated with pride because he got the inheritance as he had hoped. He easily agreed to the alimony I proposed for the divorce. Furthermore, he signed the divorce papers right there. Here, is this good enough? Yes, it is. After the lawyer confirmed everything, I nodded deeply. Then, after the lawyer left, I said goodbye to Megan and Brian.
Well, thank you for everything all these years.
Well, we only lived together for about a year, but the marriage lasted a long time, didn't it? Megan said with a nasty smile. She was probably very happy to finally kick me out.
Yes, over 10 years.
So, what are you going to do now?
Yes, I'll continue working. I have a lot to do.
As soon as I said that, Megan looked surprised. Then, she laughed and said to me, "Didn't you hear? Brian inherited the sweets shop." Yes, I know. What do you mean, yes, I know? Are you planning to keep working there even after the divorce? Isn't that a bit shameless? Megan sneered. I replied firmly. It's okay. My job isn't there.
What? Not there?
Joseph also ran a confectionery company. Megan and Brian were surprised by my words. Actually, Joseph had run two businesses. One was the old sweets shop that Megan and Brian knew. And the other was a confectionery company, a factory that produced sweets. It had a big factory in the area with a considerable number of employees. Moreover, recently, Joseph had been focusing on the confectionery company, and David was mainly running the sweets shop. I was hired by the confectionery company. So, even if Brian inherited the sweets shop, it didn't matter to me. When I told them this, Brian's face turned red, and he started shouting.
What the hell? That's mine too.
Sorry, but it's not.
Why not?
Because I got the shares of the confectionery company. It was a little before Joseph passed away. He asked me to do something. That was to manage his confectionery company. A few years ago, Joseph considered mechanizing the sweets shop. He thought about introducing some machines into the production process and keeping the shop running as it was. But David advised him that if he was going to partially mechanize, it would be better to develop new products that could be fully machine-produced. So, Joseph started another confectionery company. He separated the machine-producible products from the others, creating different products for the confectionery company and the shop. This strategy turned out to be a huge hit. The confectionery company grew rapidly. Meanwhile, Joseph also focused on developing collaboration products, drawing attention to the traditional sweets shop. As a result, Joseph's businesses became highly regarded in the local community. But you two didn't care at all. That's why Joseph left it to me.
Why you?
Megan started to get red-faced with anger. If you had visited Joseph in the hospital, maybe he would have left the company to you. Seeing Megan biting her lip in frustration made me smile a little. This was Joseph's revenge. As I thought about that, Brian suddenly approached me. Hey, Nicole. Let's get back together.
What? Why?
Dad collaborated with the sweets shop, didn't he? So, we should work together as a couple again. It would be better for us to cooperate as a married couple. Joseph would have wanted that too. Brian rambled on like that. But it was far too convenient now.
No way. The divorce is settled. There's no going back. But, Dad, oh, wait, look at this. Look at this.
Brian grabbed the will from earlier. Then, showing it to me, he continued. This will that says to leave the sweets shop to you was actually meant for you. I never expected him to confess to forging the will himself. I was amazed at how pathetic Brian looked. When I couldn't say anything, Brian spoke up.
See? It's a good deal, Nicole. I'll make you an executive, no, the president of the sweets shop. Do you even understand what you're saying? Forging a will is a crime.
In this case, is it forgery or alteration? I'm not sure what specific crime it falls under. But just hiding a will is a crime in itself. In any case, what Megan and Brian did is illegal. Megan seemed to understand this and was just silently troubled on her own. On the other hand, Brian didn't care at all. He desperately tried to convince me that he wasn't in the wrong.
I didn't exactly fake it. The will didn't have a name written on it.
Then it's not clear if it was meant for me either.
No, it was in an envelope with your name on it, and
saw Brian tear up that envelope, so I believe his actions count as destroying the will. Even for that alone, Brian should be disqualified from inheritance. At least that's what I think. But explaining this to Brian wouldn't make him understand. So, I decided to explain it in a way he could grasp. I pulled out a copy of a certain document from my bag. Placing it in front of Brian and Megan, I declared, "This is a copy of Joseph's real will."
What? The real will?
Actually, Joseph had entrusted his will to me. It's a formal document, complete with dates and signatures. And it has the names properly addressed. However, as long as there are no contradictions with the newer will, the older one can still be valid. The only contradiction with the will I have is about the sweets shop. In my will, it's written like this. The sweets shop is bequeathed to David. I'll contact the lawyer from earlier about this.
What? Then why did Dad leave this one?
Brian clutched the supposed will intended for me. I sighed and explained the truth to him. That's not the sweets shop, but our company. If Brian had visited Joseph in the hospital, Joseph would have told him the truth. He would know that Joseph owned both the sweets shop and the confectionery company and was now focusing on the confectionery company. If he understood that, he could have figured out whether he was to be entrusted with the sweets shop or our company. He could have known what Joseph wanted to ask of him and could have advised Joseph right there. But in the end, neither of them visited Joseph. Naturally, Joseph gave up on them at some point. And before he passed, he transferred the confectionery company shares to me.
Paying the taxes will be tough, but I'll do my best for Joseph. Wait a minute. So, I get nothing? That's right, you both might be disqualified from the inheritance.
I responded with a smile. I didn't mind at all. Besides, Joseph had already outlined what to do if they couldn't inherit.
Wait, does that mean we won't get the house or land either?
Megan asked, trembling. I answered with a smile.
Exactly. The house, land, and all the cash are to be donated. No way!
Megan collapsed in tears on the spot. Brian was already in a state of shock. He couldn't say anything, just let out a dry laugh. Ignoring them, I called the lawyer. After that, I informed the lawyer about the other will. I also reported that Megan and Brian tried to take my share of the will. I don't know what happened next. I left everything to the lawyer. All I know is that David inherited the sweets shop. And from what the lawyer told me, the house, land, and cash were all donated. Apparently, Brian ran out of money and said he couldn't pay me the alimony. So, it seems certain. In the end, Brian took a part-time job to pay the alimony. When I asked about his job, he said he quit, thinking he'd get the sweets shop. I was truly astounded by him. Why did I marry such a man? I don't understand now. Anyway, I'm glad I got divorced. Megan and Brian are now working part-time at the local factory. Meanwhile, I'm busy with the confectionery company. I can't take Joseph's company lightly. I work seriously every day. But even in my busy days, there's joy.
Yeah. Today's batch is good.
I taste a freshly made cookie from the factory. A gentle sweetness spreads in my mouth. It's an old-fashioned cookie.
Joseph, I'll protect this flavor.
I thought I'd visit Joseph's grave on my next day off. Just then, the cookie bag fell off the desk. It felt like a breeze blew through the closed office.
Mom, I'm pregnant.
Stumbling over her words, my 14-year-old daughter Madeline reveals this to me. Her frail, haggard appearance makes it all too easy to imagine how much anguish and tears it took for her to utter those words. There's no trace left of the bright, energetic Madeline from before. I couldn't possibly believe what Madeline was telling me, but being handed a positive pregnancy test leaves no room for doubt. Still not fully grasping the extent of Madeline's pregnancy, I gently try to probe for more details.
It must have been so hard carrying this alone. Thank you for telling me. When did you take this test? I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Did you buy the test yourself? And who's the father?
If she's pregnant, there has to be someone responsible. I know I shouldn't pry too much, but without understanding the situation, I can't take the appropriate actions for her. Yet no matter how much I call out to her, Madeline just keeps mumbling apologies, either confused or terrified of something. The next day, I consult with my husband Daryl. But kind-hearted and extremely sensitive Daryl becomes distraught over Madeline's pregnancy. Worried for them both, the three of us head to the nearest station to go to an obstetrician. But on the train platform, I realize I forgot my insurance card and have to rush back home, leaving Daryl and Madeline. Returning home, I grab the insurance card and am about to hurry out when the landline, which rarely rings, starts ringing. Sensing something ominous, I pick up the receiver and receive news that Daryl and Madeline have been taken to the hospital. Not wanting to accept reality, I rush to the hospital, searching for them to no avail. An officer at the hospital tells me the truth, leaving me in utter shock. I burn with a fierce desire for revenge against whoever subjected my precious family to such a terrible fate. Back home, I gather the people I need to talk to and immediately confess.
Daryl and Madeline, they jumped in front of a train and committed suicide.
My name is Sherry. I'm 43 years old. Originally from Boston, I worked in sales at a major insurance company. But when I got married, I quit my job and moved to my husband Daryl's hometown in the countryside. We live with his parents. The reason is that I fell in love with Daryl, who was working hard to preserve the fine traditions of his parents' bespoke tailoring shop for the future, and wanted to support him. The products sold at my in-laws' bespoke shop were too good to let fade away. I fell for Daryl, but another big factor was that I felt strongly drawn to the products my in-laws were selling.
Sales have been in the red lately, haven't they?
Yeah, it's not good at all. It's the changing times, I guess.
Almost all the other shops have gone out of business. Ours is pretty much the only bespoke tailor left around here.
For a while after moving to the countryside, I also worked at the bespoke shop handling sales. So even without hearing the numbers, I knew we were operating at a loss. Most of our business hours are quiet, with no customers. My in-laws' acquaintances do come to buy things, but it's only a handful of patrons. It's not uncommon to go a whole day without a single customer. Even without sales, it still costs money just to keep the shop running. The people making the products here are my father-in-law Jody, Daryl, and a few other craftsmen. Sales are handled by my mother-in-law Sue, my sister-in-law Sylvia, and myself. It may be a small operation, but with employees to support, operating at a loss like this means we're on the brink of shutting down. At this rate, each day will just be a slow decline into ruin. I couldn't stand that. As a woman of action, I got permission from my in-laws to put my skills from my insurance job to full use, pitching our products to various shops. While looking for places that would carry our wares, I also started working on developing new products suited to the times. Still a novice when it came to bespoke tailoring, I first visited a couple who used to run a bespoke shop and were friends with my in-laws, to gain some knowledge. From there I expanded my network, researching and gathering information on what kind of bespoke tailoring is desired today. I've never seen suit designs like this before. But these are designs you developed together with various people. I'll discuss it with Dad and the other craftsmen. Thanks. I hope this can help boost our sales, even just a little. Thanks to the new products I painstakingly developed with many people, customer traffic began to increase slightly. After that, with the birth of my daughter Madeline, I no longer had the leeway to show my face at the shop. But wanting to contribute to sales even a little, I started selling our products on social media. Struggling for over a decade like this, I devoted myself to launching many new products, selling online, and securing partner shops to carry our wares. Before long, the bespoke shop had finally pulled through the crisis of closing down. As the bespoke shop's business got on track and Daryl grew into a fine craftsman, our daughter Madeline entered middle school. At an age where she could act independently and had a solid way of thinking, I felt a bit lonely realizing my role as a parent would gradually become less necessary. But more than that, I was filled with heartwarming feelings watching Madeline enjoy her days to the fullest, smiling brightly as she devoted herself to clubs and physical activities. About a year passed smoothly, and around the time Madeline turned 14 and advanced a grade. Madeline, who had been so lively and cheerful, suddenly became gloomy. At first I thought it might be teenage rebellion, but she still obediently listened to what Daryl and I said without avoiding us, so there had to be another reason. Madeline, did something happen recently? You don't seem like yourself. It's nothing. I think I'm just a bit tired from sports. I'm going back to my room. Even when I tried to make opportunities to talk, Madeline would only say she was tired from her sports teams. She started shutting herself in her room more, and Daryl and I grew concerned. After Madeline returned to her room, leaving Daryl and I alone in the living room, I couldn't help but voice my worries to him. Why do you think she won't talk to us? Am I that unreliable? Sherry, you're a wonderful mother in my eyes. When the time is right, I'm sure she'll open up to us. I wonder if something happened at school, or... I'm just as worried as you are. Let's be patient a little longer, Sherry. Encouraged by Daryl's kind words, I resolved to take my time and be there for Madeline. It's a sensitive time, she must be feeling so alone and anxious. Maybe at her age, parents seem annoying, but my feelings for Madeline, my love for her, will never change. Wanting her to feel that, I put in my utmost effort to face Madeline and continue supporting her. Weeks later, Madeline still hadn't regained her cheerfulness. Her face seemed even more strained, as if agonizing over something, and she often lacked focus. I spent my days desperately holding back the urge to pry out of excessive concern. Mom, Madeline came to me in the living room after I finished checking social media and packaging products for online sales. It was already late at night. Normally, Madeline would be asleep in her room at this hour, but that day she came out and approached me. Maybe she was finally ready to confide her troubles. Thinking this, I shook off my sleepiness and had Madeline sit on the sofa for now.
What is it, Madeline? It's okay, we have plenty of time, so take your time. Yeah.
Madeline fell silent after that, seemingly at a loss for words or unable to muster the courage to speak. It felt like it had been a long time since I properly looked at Madeline face to face like this. Looking closely, there was no trace of her former energetic aura, and her complexion was poor. She often left her dinner unfinished lately and seemed to have lost some weight, so I was desperate to hear the rest of what she had to say. But I held back, knowing that pressing her now would only corner Madeline when she'd finally decided to open up. I waited patiently, gently rubbing Madeline's back. Finally, she opened her mouth heavily.
Mom, I'm pregnant.
What?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mom.
With trembling hands, Madeline took out a pregnancy test with a positive result. I was completely bewildered by this unbelievable reality. But seeing Madeline tearfully repeating apologies, I realized she must have been suffering alone with this worry for so long, and my heart ached.
Madeline. It must have been so hard, keeping this to yourself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So, do you have any idea who? If you're pregnant, then.
But no matter how I asked, Madeline only responded with sobs and apologies. I knew I shouldn't rush her, but it was difficult to plan our next steps without knowing the facts. I tried asking every question I could think of. Still, Madeline only trembled.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mom, forgive me. Please don't hate me. It's okay, Madeline. I could never hate you.
Madeline seemed to be crushed under the weight of what she had done, hyperventilating to the point where she couldn't give any details. It was late at night and she needed sleep to recover, so I soothed the panicking Madeline to calm her down, deciding to have her explain more at the hospital tomorrow. The next day, I woke up earlier than usual and woke Daryl.
What's going on? It's so early in the morning. I'm sorry for the early wake-up call, but there's something important I need to talk to you about.
It's about Madeline. As soon as Daryl realized it was about Madeline, he sat up immediately, ready to listen.
I need you to stay calm when you hear this. Madeline is pregnant. I just found out in the middle of the night too. I only know the facts, but... Pregnant. You're joking, right?
His disbelief was understandable. Daryl's eyes went wide, his voice and lips trembling as he forced the words out. As if to say, surely not our child. I felt the same way.
I think Madeline had been agonizing over this for a while. After she told me, she kept apologizing over and over while hyperventilating. You've seen how she's been acting lately, right?
Yeah. When Madeline told me, I was extremely shaken up too, all sorts of emotions threatening to explode out of me, but Daryl seemed to be taking the shock even harder than I did. I could tell he was trying his best to listen despite being upset, but it didn't feel like he was just passively taking in my words. Daryl has always been kind-hearted and sensitive by nature. Even without saying it out loud, he was probably imagining how Madeline felt, taking on damage as if it was his own. And as a father, he must have been shocked that his young daughter was pregnant.
Until we get more details at the hospital, let's not say anything that might upset Madeline. We're planning to go to the OBGYN in the next town over today. I want you to come with us.
Okay. I told him because I felt I couldn't hide the truth, but seeing how shaken and haggard Daryl became filled me with regret for saying anything. But I knew I was doing the right thing. Daryl must be desperately trying to process the reality of the situation. If that was the case, then I needed to take charge with a strong will. I felt bad for my in-laws, but I contacted them to let them know Madeline had suddenly fallen ill and got permission for Daryl and I to take off work. When Madeline woke up, I tried asking her again about the circumstances of her pregnancy, but couldn't get any solid information. Maybe it was hard for her to say in front of her father. With that thought, I simply gave the silent Madeline a gentle hug. As I did that, I realized our departure time was approaching and the three of us left the house. We took a taxi to the nearest train station. When we got to the platform, I realized I had forgotten something critical. I think I forgot Madeline's insurance card. In that case, should I go back and get it? No, you and Madeline wait here on the platform. I'll go grab it and be right back. I could have let Daryl handle it, but I felt uneasy about making the somewhat long walk alone in his current state, unable to hide his fatigue after hearing about Madeline. I didn't want him getting lost in thought and becoming careless. And I couldn't very well make Madeline walk unnecessarily when she looked ill. So I left the two of them on the station platform and headed back home. Our house is a fair distance from the nearest station. If there had been a taxi at the stand outside, I would have taken one, but there wasn't a single car there at a time like this. So I decided to sprint home at full speed. Honestly, I wanted to get Madeline to the OBGYN as soon as possible. As I ran, short of breath, I harshly criticized myself for forgetting something so important. I arrived home, put the insurance card in my wallet and was about to leave when the rarely used landline phone suddenly started ringing. I could have ignored it and rushed to the station, but I felt I had to answer. I dashed to the living room and picked up the phone. The caller was a nurse from the biggest hospital in the area. In a flat tone, she delivered the shocking news that Daryl and Madeline had been taken to the hospital. The hospital staff must have been swamped, because she didn't provide any other information, just telling me to come to the hospital immediately. In a daze, I called a taxi and headed to the hospital where the two of them presumably were. On the way, the taxi driver mentioned there had been a fatal accident on the train tracks, halting the trains. Hearing that, I broke out in a cold sweat, wondering if the people who jumped might have been Daryl and Madeline. The image of a depressed and unwell Madeline alongside a haggard Daryl, reeling in shock after learning of his daughter's pregnancy. A vivid scenario played out in my mind of these two impulsively jumping onto the tracks together as a train approached. It can't be, I told myself, but once the worst-case scenario popped into my head, it continued smoldering inside me. Please let them be okay. I arrived at the hospital and entered the ER where many nurses and doctors were rushing about in a flurry. Looking a bit further in, I saw the surgery in progress, light glowing red. An ominous feeling stirred up my chest, the negative speculations mocking my wish that I was just overthinking things. I couldn't very well talk to the frantically scurrying nurses, but I also didn't know where to go. As I stood there at a loss, a police officer approached me. Is there something I can help you with? Actually, I explained the series of events that led me here. The officer gave a small nod of understanding. It seemed he had been waiting for me. Then, he began to speak in a heavy tone about what had happened on the station platform with Daryl and Madeline. Brace yourself for what I'm about to tell you. The truth is. After that, I was stunned by the revealed facts. Burning with a desire for revenge, I left the hospital alone and returned home. Then, in order to report today's events to my in-laws and family, I had them gather in the living room after closing the shop. I'm sorry, Jody, Sue. Sylvia, thank you for joining us too. What on earth is going on? I heard Madeline wasn't feeling well and got worried.
You don't think something happened to Madeline, do you?
While Jody and Sue expressed their concern, Sylvia looked bored as she inspected her nails. Her behavior only fueled my anger further, but I had to hold on just a little longer. I would expose her true colors. With that thought in mind, I began to speak, my emotions still running high. The truth is, Madeline is pregnant. And today, on the way to the obstetrician with the family, she and Daryl jumped in front of a train in an attempted suicide pact. My in-laws were left speechless by my explanation. Their reaction was completely understandable. The shocking nature of my words naturally left them at a loss. However, Sylvia's response was markedly different. Upon hearing the news, she began trembling, a look of panic spreading across her face. Her reaction was exactly as I had anticipated, and I had to stifle the laughter welling up inside me. As Sylvia turned pale and shook, my in-laws tried to calm her, their voices soothing. But Sylvia brushed off their attempts at comfort.
I'm not to blame. I didn't do anything wrong. I would have never imagined they would be jumping in front of a train.
With that outburst, she fled from the living room. Jody and Sue watched in bewilderment as Sylvia ran off, clearly having no idea what was happening.
What on earth? What's going on?
Suddenly, an ear-piercing scream rang out, prompting Jody and Sue to jump to their feet and rush out of the living room. There they found Sylvia, collapsed on the ground in shock. Standing before her were Daryl and Madeline, both leveling disgusted glares at Sylvia.
How dare you treat my precious daughter so cruelly? I can't believe it. I trusted you, Auntie. We've already consulted the police about taking appropriate action. You're going to have to take responsibility for what you've done.
Left behind by the rapid developments, Jody and Sue stared at me in utter confusion, clearly at a loss. Though my goal had been to expose Sylvia's misdeeds, I had still told a lie that left my in-laws reeling. Feeling the need to apologize and explain the truth, I began to recount what had really happened. When I arrived at the hospital, the police officer informed me that Daryl and Madeline had fallen down a flight of stairs on the train platform. According to eyewitness reports, Madeline had stumbled on the steps, and though Daryl tried to catch her, they both ended up tumbling down. A passerby who saw the accident called for an ambulance and reported the incident to the police. Thanks to their quick action, Daryl and Madeline were rushed to the hospital within minutes of the accident occurring. Though they were both covered in bruises, their lives weren't in danger and hospitalization wouldn't be necessary, much to my relief. The officer who responded to the call was exceptionally kind. Despite having already finished processing the scene, he waited for me, a family member, to arrive at the emergency ward. You mentioned that your daughter is pregnant. With a fall like that, I'm afraid there's a possibility she may have miscarried.
Oh no. I believe they're running tests now.
Please, follow me. The officer led me deep into the emergency ward, where I spotted Daryl and Madeline sitting on chairs in the hallway. I broke into a run, rushing to their side.
Madeline! Daryl! Thank goodness! Thank goodness you're all right.
Sherry, I'm so sorry for worrying you.
Mom! I'm sorry.
As I embraced them, I felt the warmth of their bodies and they responded to my frantic questions, bringing tears of relief to my eyes. Daryl's arms and head were wrapped in bandages, but Madeline appeared to be unharmed. While I was relieved by that fact, the officer's words echoed in my mind. To face pregnancy and miscarriage at such a young age was unimaginably cruel.
What about the test results?
About that. it turns out Madeline wasn't actually pregnant.
What?
Really? Madeline had apparently been worried about her missed periods. However, the doctor suggested that her young age, sleep deprivation, and stress were likely contributing factors. Her eating habits had also been poor recently, which undoubtedly played a role as well. But the pregnancy test was positive. The doctor thought that was strange too. Madeline, where did you get that pregnancy test? Well, Auntie gave it to me. As soon as she began to explain, tears welled up in Madeline's eyes as a memory seemed to surface. I quickly pulled out a handkerchief and tried to wipe away her tears, but they continued to flow endlessly. Daryl and I listened intently to Madeline's halting, jumbled explanation, trying to piece together what had driven her to such despair. In summary, Madeline had been anxious about missing her period for 2 months. Having never experienced that before, she was filled with unease. Unfortunately, Sylvia found out about her worries. It's not normal to miss your period for 2 months, right? Something must be seriously wrong. Maybe you're sick, or maybe you're pregnant. You're right. I'm really worried. Why don't you take a pregnancy test, just to be sure? I have a few on hand. But I haven't done anything that would get me pregnant. Well, it doesn't hurt to check. Come on, it'll only take a minute. Overwhelmed by Sylvia's forcefulness, Madeline found herself unable to refuse and reluctantly took the test. And the result was positive. Despite not having engaged in any activities that could lead to pregnancy, Madeline was baffled by the test results and went to Sylvia for advice. I took the test, and this is positive, isn't it? Are you serious? Getting pregnant at your age is a disaster. Your life is basically over. I guess school is out of the question now, huh? But I haven't done anything that would get me pregnant. What? The test results don't lie. Do you know how accurate these tests are? 99.9%. That means you're pregnant. What are you going to do now? This is going to cause so much trouble for me and your mom and dad. Oh no! What should I do, Auntie? Though Madeline insisted she had done nothing wrong, Sylvia declared that the test results were absolute. Her expression turned terrifying as she berated Madeline. Panicking and at a loss for what to do, Madeline turned to Sylvia for help. But Sylvia just glared at her with utter revulsion, brushing off her pleas. Getting pregnant in middle school? What is wrong with you? That's disgusting. I can't believe you do something like that when you're so young. You're acting like a total slut. What? You can't even support yourself, and now you're pregnant? This is a serious crime, you know. We've worked so hard to get the store back on its feet, and now your baby is going to ruin everything and maybe even force us to close down. I will never forgive you if that happens. You better figure this out. Rather than providing Madeline with accurate information, Sylvia did nothing but stoke her fears before storming off, leaving Madeline alone to deal with the fallout. Abandoned and directionless, Madeline didn't know what to do. She wanted to reach out for help, but Sylvia's cruel words haunted her, paralyzing her. Madeline was terrified that her own parents, the ultimate authority figures in her life, would react the same way Sylvia had. Unable to voice her fears, she bottled everything up, heaping her troubles to herself. With no friends to confide in, Madeline was left to bear the crushing weight of a potential pregnancy all alone. The emotional strain sapped her energy, robbed her of sleep, and stole her appetite. In fact, it was sleep deprivation and malnourishment that caused the dizziness that sent Madeline tumbling down those fateful stairs. By the time Madeline finished her story, her face was a mess of tears and snot. No child should have to shoulder such a terrible burden alone. I pulled Madeline into a tight embrace. Daryl, having heard everything, was crying too. For a long while, the three of us just held each other.
Madeline, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry I didn't notice.
Me too. I'm sorry, Madeline.
No, it's okay.
I could feel you both supporting me, even if I didn't say anything. So, it's not your fault. As we hugged, I noticed Madeline was still crying, her body trembling. It seemed the incident had left her traumatized, and my heart ached for her. I couldn't forgive Sylvia for putting my child through such an ordeal. I told Daryl and Madeline to come home once they had calmed down a bit, then left the hospital on my own. After hearing the whole story, my in-laws turned to face Sylvia, their faces flushed with anger. Sylvia, finding herself without allies, glanced around nervously as she searched for words.
About that pregnancy test you gave Madeline. Could it have been a fake? I did some research and found out there are novelty tests designed to always show a positive result. They're mostly sold online.
Did you know that?
I don't know anything about that. I've never heard of such a thing. Well then, you won't mind showing us your purchase history, right? Why should I have to show you what's on my phone? No way. I'm not letting you snoop through my stuff. If you really didn't know, you wouldn't be so defensive. And you just said you never would have thought to do something like that, didn't you? Sounds to me like you're admitting guilt. I'm telling you, I don't know.
Sylvia tried to stand up and run away, but Jody grabbed her and demanded to see her purchase history. It seemed like she couldn't resist anymore. Then, Sylvia, resigned, threw the smartphone screen showing the purchase history towards me. I knew it. The screen displayed the record of a pregnancy test kit purchased as a prank. It was clear evidence of what Sylvia had done. Unable to hide it any longer, Sylvia confessed everything.
Yes, I did it all. From the start, I couldn't stand Sherry acting all high and mighty after suddenly showing up. So, when I found out about Madeline's irregular periods, I just thought I'd mess with her a little. It was just a joke. Why are you all ganging up on me and complaining?
Sylvia's confession revealed her selfish motives. The fact that I had contributed to Custom Tailor's sales and turned the business around. Moreover, through sales activities, I had become friendly with the neighbors and gained more acquaintances. From Sylvia's perspective, it seemed she didn't like that I was getting along better with everyone than she was. Unlike me, who always takes action and tries to interact with people, Sylvia had a passive personality. She had beautiful features and was recognized as a beauty by everyone. That's why Sylvia, who took pride in it, believed that others should always approach her first. She was friendly to those who did something for her, but cold to those who didn't do anything in particular. I think that's where the difference in our popularity stemmed from.
What the heck? Just because you're a little good at sales, you're getting carried away. I bet you just asked people for favors, sucked up to them, and got them to praise you. Everyone keeps going on about Sherry, even though you're uglier than me. Hey! How can you say that to Sherry? Sherry has been working hard for our store, desperately coming up with new products and finding sales leads, sacrificing even her sleep. What have you been doing in the meantime?
It's all right, Daryl, that's enough. I was furious at Sylvia's words, but this was in front of Madeline. I didn't want to show her a scene of us fighting with foul language. Perhaps sensing that, Daryl suppressed his anger and looked towards the front door.
We've called the police too, so we absolutely won't forgive you. There's no need to make such a big deal out of it. Can't you take a joke? I can't believe this.
Sylvia, who was taken away by Daryl, was being questioned by the police officer who had rushed over after Daryl's call, while loudly complaining. The officer was different from the one at the hospital, but it seemed like he had been briefed well and had a general grasp of the situation. Perhaps Sylvia was a little intimidated in front of the officer, or maybe she judged that it was better to tell the truth without hiding anything in order to be released quickly, but she honestly admitted the facts. Her tone was very light. Until the very end. It was just meant to be a little joke. It was a joke, so there's no need to apologize. She kept appealing to the officer. Seeing this, my parents-in-law kept apologizing to Madeline and me over and over again. It wasn't my parents-in-law's fault, but no matter how much we told them to stop, they wouldn't listen at all. While we were arguing back and forth, it seemed Sylvia had been released and came back to us. Ah, I went through hell. I really can't believe this.
Aren't you going to apologize to Madeline and Sherry?
That's right.
You shameless woman. Do you have any idea how much you hurt Madeline?
Huh? I keep telling you. It was just a joke. How many times do I have to say it for you to understand? Sylvia said mockingly, but in the end, there was not a single word of apology. Daryl, who had finished talking to the officer, returned to me with a frustrated look on his face. Judging from his demeanor, I could tell the result was not good. The police officer seemed disappointed too, but he said this case isn't one where an arrest can be made. He did give a stern warning, but it didn't seem like she was willing to listen. I see. I guess that's how it is. Sylvia, who had gotten off with just a warning, was triumphantly complaining. She didn't seem to care at all that she had turned my parents-in-law, me, Daryl, and Madeline against her. I had thought we could at least teach her a little lesson, but in the end, my revenge didn't go well, and I was left just feeling bitter. The next few days, I tried to avoid running into Sylvia as much as possible for Madeline's sake, but I couldn't come to terms with the situation. My in-laws kept apologizing to Madeline and me as always, but that wasn't the point. Why should we, who had done nothing wrong, have to be considerate and feel uncomfortable in our own home? Moreover, Sylvia had started finding fault with me and harassing me at the storefront too. Fortunately, it hadn't escalated thanks to Sue's stern glares, but the resentment was still building up. I couldn't put Madeline at ease here. Having come to that conclusion, I told Daryl that I wanted us to move out of my in-laws' place and build a house for the three of us. Back when Custom Tailor was struggling, there were times I didn't receive a proper salary, so I hadn't been able to save up, but in this rural town, rental properties didn't exist. If we wanted to live here, we needed to build a house. I knew it would be tough, but in order to somehow make it happen, I desperately focused on sales and online marketing. Then, a few months later, just as we were slowly building up funds, Sylvia suddenly abandoned everything, including her job, and casually left home one day. Apparently, the reason was that she had found her destined love. Furious at her utterly selfish reason, my in-laws' anger exploded. After calling her numerous times, when Sylvia finally answered, Jody declared, "You're disowned." He then roughly hung up the phone. A whole year had quickly passed since Sylvia left, and we had been considering moving out of my in-laws' place, but with Sylvia's sudden disappearance, we were still living with them. Business was still going great, and every day was consumed by work. I had almost completely forgotten about Sylvia's existence. Then, one evening, the house phone rang. Wondering who it could be at this hour, I watched as Jody, who was nearby, answered the call. Picking up the receiver, Jody let out a big sigh and furrowed his brow.
"Hey! The house is gone! What's going on?"
Hearing the familiar loud voice leaking out from the phone, Daryl and I, who were there, exchanged surprised looks. We had never dreamed that Sylvia would call. But Jody had a calm demeanor, as if he had known a call would come someday.
We sold the house a long time ago. Huh? I never heard about that. Tell me where you moved.
Why would I tell you? You're no longer a part of our lives. In fact, about 6 months after Sylvia left, we had moved to the city. It was my in-laws who had suggested it. I didn't know the full circumstances, but there was no way someone with Sylvia's personality could live harmoniously with a man. My in-laws had been wary that someday, Sylvia would be kicked out and come back in a pinch.
What are you saying? The store. You have the store, don't you? You'll be in trouble if I don't take it over for you. I haven't forgiven you for calling custom tailors' work outdated and a garbage business. I'd rather close the store than have you take over.
Jody was so enraged like I had never seen before. Just like Daryl, he was usually gentle, and I had rarely seen him angry. For Jody to raise his voice this much, it must be quite serious. Still, I was surprised to hear that she had declared custom tailors' work to be an outdated garbage business in the past. Thinking about how my in-laws had forgiven such a worthless daughter and had continued on without abandoning her all this time, I couldn't hold back my tears.
I'll say it one more time. You're disowned. Don't ever show your face in front of us again. Wait a minute. I'm in a really tough spot right now. Money. I need money. Come on, Dad, help me out.
Before Sylvia could finish talking, Jody had hung up the phone, so I couldn't hear any more of her words after that. I could tell she had tried to win him over with tears at the end, but I wasn't sure how that pleading voice sounded to Jody. Jody's back after hanging up the phone was indescribably lonely, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything. Daryl gently patted my shoulder as I stood there at a loss for words. Far away from our hometown where the store used to be, we had no idea what became of Sylvia and were once again caught up in our busy daily lives. However, a few months later, while minding the store with Sue, a couple who were acquaintances of my in-laws from far away came to visit. This couple had continued to buy our products back when the store was on the verge of closing down. They had been purchasing through mail order for a while, but they had apparently come to see us while on a trip. And it was from this couple that I heard about Sylvia's current situation. It seemed that when Sylvia found out she had lost her house, she went around approaching anyone she could find in the neighborhood. Since it was a small rural area, Sylvia's misdeeds were already known to all the residents, and far from lending a helping hand, there was not a single person who even offered her kind words. A shameless woman who had hurt a girl of marriageable age with an unethical prank and remained defiant even to the police. She was apparently living her days with people talking behind her back. Even for Sylvia, living in that small town with no allies must have been uncomfortable. And as for Sylvia's partner, about whom we hadn't known the details, it turned out to be a man from the bar she frequented. Sylvia had become infatuated with a man at a certain bar a few train stations away from her hometown. Confident in her own beauty, Sylvia had no doubt that the man at the bar was in love with her. To make the barman even more crazy about her, she had poured in large sums of money and even used up all her savings. After leaving home, she had apparently been frequenting the bar, barely working and accumulating debt. But such a lifestyle couldn't continue forever, and when she reached a point where she couldn't repay her debts or borrow more money, she seemed to have sought help from the man she was so invested in. The man himself was questionable, but that was her own fault. After being swiftly dumped by a woman who was only beautiful and had recklessly created debt, she was apparently struggling to repay her loans without even receiving help. With no place to live, Sylvia was forced to live on the streets for a while. However, the residents, thinking it would be troublesome if she suddenly turned up dead after being on the streets for a long time, had Sylvia live in a dilapidated house with a hole in the roof that could hardly be called clean. And now, even in her hardship, unable to honestly work, Sylvia was apparently clutching her remaining money, riding the train, and trying to seduce any man who looked wealthy. And using the pregnancy test that would absolutely show a positive result, which she had given to Madeline, she was reportedly informing her numerous partners with whom she had physical relations that she was pregnant and demanding marriage or child support payments. I was astounded that she was still targeting rich men at this point, but apparently, that strategy had yet to succeed, and she was often seen returning to the rundown house in her hometown, exhausted. The area around her hometown was by no means urban, so Sylvia's bad reputation had spread in no time. There was a terrible woman, beautiful but threatening pregnancy to demand marriage and child support. As such rumors spread, it had apparently become difficult for her to even seduce men recently. Even when she occasionally succeeded in bringing a man home, she would end up having her money taken and only wearing herself down, according to the couple who visited the store. Having lost a home to return to and unable to maintain the beauty she had absolute confidence in, Sylvia's state must be quite unseemly. Having achieved revenge in an unexpected way, I felt a little lighter in my heart. It was a shame I couldn't see it with my own eyes, but I couldn't even spare the time to go see how Sylvia was doing now. She really is a hopeless child as always, causing trouble for everyone. Sue. Although she had declared Sylvia disowned, just like Jody, the inherently kind Sue seemed to be pained by Sylvia's current situation. She also seemed concerned about causing trouble for the former neighborhood residents, but the couple who visited the store laughed, saying it made for a good topic of conversation. After chatting for a bit, they purchased a few new products and left. Changing the subject, the reason my in-laws had suggested moving was that I had mentioned our past efforts to save up funds to move out of their house to avoid Sylvia. I had meant it as a casual conversation, but my in-laws said they would both contribute money to build a new home on a new piece of land. They had apparently also been considering relocating to a more convenient location for a long time and had been saving up. Thanks to that, we were able to build a better house than expected, with a factory next to the store-cum house. The craftsmen were all people who had fallen for my in-laws' character after overcoming the difficult times together, so they followed us to the distant new location. Recently, young apprentices who have been inspired by the quality of the products here have started joining us, saying they want to learn the techniques, and our whole family has begun working on passing down the tradition. There may still be a long way to go, but I feel a strong sense of fulfillment in this work. Ever since Madeline stopped the irregular lifestyle that the doctor had warned her about, perhaps because she has no stress, her menstrual cycle has returned to normal, and she seems to be getting along well with the friends she made at her new school. Moreover, Madeline has recently developed a strong interest in fashion and has started thinking about creating original designs for clothes, scarves, and such. Her design approach from a perspective that we don't have is full of new discoveries. Every day is so busy that I have no time to rest, but I felt fulfilled. I want to work hard to further expand the company and spread the appeal of custom tailor to many more people. My name is Olivia. I'm 35 and have been married to my husband Lucas for 7 years. We have a 5-year-old son, Thomas. Normally, it's just the three of us living a peaceful life, but I have one major grievance. It's the long vacations and Christmas when we go to Lucas's parents' house. Only his parents live there, but during the holidays, his sister and her family join us too. During these gatherings, which sometimes exceed 10 people, I'm expected to handle all the meal preparations. Because I'm married to the eldest son, everyone seems to think it's my duty. His sisters don't help me at all. On top of that, they leave their kids with me and go out to have fun. Even Lucas doesn't offer me any help, so as the holidays approach, I start to dread them. Just the thought of preparing meals at my in-laws is painful, not to mention the harassment I endure from Lucas's mother, Ava. From the beginning of our marriage, Ava has criticized everything I do. The first time we went to visit after getting married, she told me out of the blue, "Olivia, please prepare all the meals while you're here." I was shocked. It was my first time in their kitchen, and everything was thrown at me. In a panic, I checked the fridge, finding almost nothing. I had to start by shopping for groceries. "Do you want anything specific to eat?" I asked with a smile without showing my irritation.
"Just make something delicious. Don't check with us every time, just get on with the cooking."
Jackson, Lucas's father, seemed nice and calm, but I couldn't figure out what he really thought. Ava was always openly hostile towards me. Even when I casually asked Lucas about his parents' favorite dishes, "Anything's fine, don't worry too much about it," he always responds so casually. Lucas is originally unreliable, but since then, my distrust in him has only grown. In the end, I decided to make a safe choice and cook curry. As the smell of curry began to waft from the kitchen, Ava started her snide remarks.
"Curry gives me heartburn. I'll have to take some antacid tonight."
Without time to make anything else, I served the curry for dinner. Ava complained that the curry was too spicy, or that she preferred pork over beef.
"Anyone can make a decent curry,"
she remarked, leaving the comment hanging in the air, yet she went for seconds. Meanwhile, Jackson ate without saying a word, but after he finished, he let out a deep sigh and left the room. While Ava's reactions are irritating, Jackson's sigh feels more condemning than her snide remarks. Dealing with just my in-laws' meals is stressful enough, but it gets even worse when Lucas's sisters and their families join. Harper's family consists of Lucas's sister Harper, her husband Ethan, and their daughter. Harper, in her appearance and manner of speaking, is frighteningly similar to Ava. Together, they hurl insults at me, making it feel like there are two Avas. When Harper comes to visit, she expects me to handle everything from cooking to making beds. Of course, she doesn't thank me, she takes it for granted. Ethan, usually quiet around his in-laws and Harper, becomes tyrannical when they're not around. "Go buy cigarettes," he'd demand, treating me more like a housemaid than family. Their daughter Emma, much like Harper, seems spiteful.
"Olivia, we're out of juice."
Then Ethan would join in, ordering,
"Olivia, I'm out of beer. Bring some."
Laughing foolishly, the two of them enjoy themselves. They are usually quiet in front of Harper, probably because they're used to being scolded by her. They seem to let loose when at the in-laws. For me, who ends up doing all the work, it's unbearable. Natalie's family includes Lucas's sister Natalie, her husband Mason, and their son. Compared to the insidious Ava and Harper, Natalie is brighter and easier to talk to. She always comes to chat while I'm preparing meals. While it's nice to be approached so casually, Natalie doesn't help at all. At first, I used to listen to her seriously, but if she's not going to help, she's just in the way. Eventually, when I responded non-committally to her chatter,
"Are you even listening to me?"
she'd snap. Busy with work, I had to listen to Natalie's endless, meaningless stories about her husband's complaints or her in-laws' snide remarks. I wanted to vent to Natalie too, but I couldn't dare speak ill of the in-laws. As soon as Natalie realizes I'm not fully engaged, she'd tattle to Ava and Harper. Then I'd get scolded by both Ava and Harper.
"Just because she's your sister-in-law doesn't mean you can ignore her. You should at least listen to her. Such a mean spirit, bullying your weaker sister."
They'd freely insult me. I wanted to retort, "Who's the mean one here?" But I didn't have the courage. All I could do was endure the long vacations and Christmases. Even when I was pregnant, the treatment didn't change.
"I worked as usual the day after I gave birth,"
Ava would brag, expecting the same from me. I heard from Lucas that Ava had been badly harassed by her mother-in-law too. It seems she's intent on making me experience the same misery. I wish she would stop returning the ill treatment she received onto her daughter-in-law. Thomas was born in December, so that year, we didn't go to the in-laws for Christmas. "Why don't you go home alone?" I suggested to Lucas. He replied grumpily, "It's boring to go back by myself, so let's skip it this year." He informed me that year, the siblings didn't stay at the in-laws for Christmas as usual. They left immediately. Without me there, nobody could handle the meal preparations, so no one stayed overnight. But from the next vacation onwards, the hellish treatment at the in-laws returned. Now, I had to take care of Thomas while preparing meals and accommodations. When Thomas dirted his clothes and I had to do laundry at the in-laws,
Since we're letting you use the washing machine, do our laundry as well.
they started making me wash their laundry too. Seeing this, the sisters-in-law began piling their laundry on me as well. I ended up folding Ava's and her sister's laundry. Completely turned into a housemaid, they even dumped childcare on me.
Looking after 1 or 2 kids is the same. Please take care of my son.
They'd say before leaving the newborn with me and going out to have fun with Ava and the family. Only Jackson stayed home, pretending not to notice anything and watching TV. I was shocked when even Lucas left with Ava and the others. From that moment, my affection for Lucas began to cool off. As I was taking care of the 2 babies, one of them would inevitably start crying. Then Jackson would explode in anger.
The noise is so loud, I can't hear the TV. Finally got rid of the annoying bunch, and I can't even watch TV in peace.
Jackson, usually quiet in front of Ava and her daughters, didn't hesitate to complain to me. I hated his silent pressure on regular days, but him yelling like this was just pathetic. The men in this house only act tough when the women aren't around, then badmouth them behind their backs, especially Mason, who is amusing to watch because of his drastic two-faced nature. In front of Ava and the sisters-in-law, he's all smiles, serving food and drinks diligently. But when the women are absent, he's swapping nasty comments about their wives with Ethan. Not caring about how it affects me, his wife, they freely talk trash.
Why do we have to come here every vacation and Christmas? I feel the same. It's nothing but torture for us husbands.
Moreover,
just between us, my marriage isn't going too well, so next time I might not be here.
They'd say, laughing uproariously. Whether they're joking or serious. They don't care that I'm listening, the conversation escalates.
Honestly, my marriage isn't great either. My wife is too domineering, always looking down on me.
They glanced around, and seeing it was just me, they began whispering.
My wife is just like her mother. Thinking about her getting even tougher with age is dreadful. Daughters do resemble their mothers, don't they? Recently, even her face is starting to look like her mother's, and it's creepy.
Both of them were rolling on the floor, laughing at their own words. I began to wonder if Lucas also talked badly about me when I wasn't around. These two, laughing at such talk, would transform into entirely different people the moment Ava or the sisters-in-law appeared. They knew that if I told Ava or the sisters-in-law about their behavior, I would be the one accused of lying. That's why they felt free to speak ill of Ava and the sisters-in-law in front of me. Year by year, the workload dumped on me during the holidays at the in-laws grew heavier. Apart from meals, overnight arrangements, childcare, and laundry, now I was even tasked with picking up and dropping off Natalie's family. During a meal right before everyone was about to leave.
I'd like a beer, but I have to drive home, so maybe I should refrain.
Mason mentioned. Hearing this, Ava chimed in. From next time, let's have Olivia pick you up. That way, you can drink beer without any worries. She suggested to Mason. Mason, perhaps jokingly, agreed, but Ava took it seriously. No, you don't need to go that far, he said. But cutting off his words, Ava commanded.
From now on, you will do the pickups.
No one dared to object. In the car back home, even I, usually restrained, lashed out at Lucas.
I'm already cooking, arranging accommodations, taking care of the kids, and even doing everyone's laundry. Now I have to do pickups too.
Lucas, taken aback by my anger, was at a loss for words.
Is there no limit to harassing your wife? How much more do they want to exploit me?
My anger was justified. The in-laws' house was in a snowy region, making Christmas visits challenging. Natalie's house was a 2-hour drive one way, but in heavy snow, it could take nearly double that time. I knew Ava would expect me to finish cooking and then go pick up Natalie's family. Exhausted and asked to drive in such conditions was absurd. I'm not accustomed to long drives, and surely Natalie's family would be terrified too. I was furious that Lucas, knowing this, didn't stand up to Ava.
I'm cutting ties with your family. I won't see Jackson, Ava, or your sisters ever again.
I didn't want to see Ava or the sisters who did as they pleased. Hoping to calm my fury, he responded with a forced smile. Totally fine. I'll let Mom and everyone know, so don't worry. When Lucas talks smoothly like this, he's usually just trying to appease the situation. But with his agreement, I finally felt freed from the in-laws' clutches. I marvel at my own patience over the past 7 years of marriage. That Christmas, I went on a trip with Thomas and my parents. It was the first time since Thomas was born that I spent Christmas with my parents. It's rare for us to be together for Christmas. Is it okay for Lucas to go back to his parents alone? Having shared my in-laws' harsh treatment with them, my parents were surprised by the trip. It's okay. I have Lucas's permission, so he won't complain. I assured them, though I wasn't sure if Lucas had really talked to his parents. He had reluctantly agreed to cut ties with his family after my outburst, but I doubted his parents and sisters would accept it easily. They had been taking it easy so far, likely avoiding preparing meals themselves. However, they probably thought they could easily buy meals from the supermarket, so I assumed they weren't too worried. My parents, seeing their grandson Thomas after a long time, were overjoyed, and Thomas seemed to have fun too. When we visited the in-laws, I never had time to pay attention to Thomas, and I realized he must have felt lonely. Watching the three of them having fun, I completely forgot about the in-laws. Then, in the lobby of the luxurious hotel where we were relaxing, a familiar man walked in with a young woman on his arm. He resembled Mason, but he was supposed to be at the in-laws. The more I looked, the more he seemed familiar, and it appeared he noticed my stare. The man made a surprised face and quickly turned away. Likely because he was up to something shady. I pretended not to see and averted my gaze from the man. Just then, I received a call from Lucas. Hello, what's up?
Please, can you come to the family home right now? It's chaos here, nothing is prepared. Haven't we agreed that I wouldn't go anymore from this year?
I wasn't surprised. I had expected something like this.
I did mention it, but it seems the message didn't get across.
He replied. I figured he hadn't really talked to his parents. I had already informed them that I wouldn't be able to pick up Natalie's family. Natalie had complained, but it seemed she had been pacified. Lucas was desperately trying to get me to come back. But I was more focused on the commotion and what sounded like Natalie's voice in the background.
Mason has run off with some woman. He said he was going to work, but when I called the office, they said he was off today.
Hearing Natalie's words confirmed that the man I saw was indeed her husband.
Mason is at the hotel we're staying at right now,
I responded. Lucas was taken aback by the sudden shift in the conversation.
What? My brother-in-law is there?
I decided to tell the truth, thinking it would serve Natalie right for how she had treated me. Natalie must have heard Lucas's voice, as she snatched his mobile phone and started shouting at me.
Mason is there! Where are you right now?
Natalie screamed, almost rupturing my eardrums. Young and beautiful woman, high-class hotel. I replied. Next, Ava grabbed the phone and started yelling at me.
How dare you go to a hotel on your own? You think that's acceptable?
Even though they're shouting at me loudly, I can hear them.
I've discussed this with Lucas. I have his permission to not associate with you anymore.
I replied, deliberately provoking her. Ava started screaming something incomprehensible. Then Harper snatched the phone. We can't even have a meal without you. Please, somehow come back. Harper said, unusually polite, but I knew she only spoke like that when in trouble. In the background, Emma, Harper's ill-natured daughter, yelled,
Olivia! Hurry up and prepare the meal!
I couldn't help but laugh, realizing she was just echoing Harper's true feelings. The in-laws' house seemed to be in such a frenzy that I just hung up the phone. Since I had set my phone to reject calls, I didn't know what happened afterward until Lucas returned home. Seeing Lucas's reaction upon his return, I was prepared for the possibility of divorce. Worst case scenario, I was ready to make a life for Thomas and myself as an office worker. When Lucas returned from his parents' house, he apologized profoundly. I now understand how hard it's been for you all this time. I'm truly sorry. Lucas had been burdened with preparing the Christmas meal, doing everyone's laundry, and taking care of the kids, especially Natalie's child, throughout the holiday. Natalie, after hearing from me about the affair, had tracked Mason down to our hotel, apparently catching him in the act. Indeed, when we were leaving, the hotel staff seemed flustered, and there was talk of a quarreling couple. Perhaps that was her. Everyone had complained about Lucas's cooking, having never done it before, and, fed up with their nasty remarks.
I'm cutting ties with this house too. I'm never coming back,
he snapped. It seems Lucas has declared cutting ties as well. Hearing Lucas's declaration of disconnection, I felt relieved and confessed. If you hadn't decided to cut ties with your family, I was planning to divorce you. Smiling as I said this, Lucas began to cry and apologized again. I'm really sorry. Believing in his tears, I decided to keep striving together as a couple. From that year on, we decided to go on trips with my parents for Christmas. Both my parents and our family are delighted, and we intend to keep this tradition. Meanwhile, the in-laws' house doesn't seem to gather anyone anymore. Natalie and her husband divorced soon after. Natalie, having custody of the child, now had to work to support her life, leaving her with no long vacations or Christmases. Harper also realized that if the other siblings didn't return, she would have to prepare the meals herself, and didn't want to go through that hassle just to visit her parents' house. Left alone, the in-laws led a lonely life, unable to see their children or grandchildren. Ava, unable to harass anyone else, seemed to have turned her frustrations on Jackson, and I heard from Lucas that Jackson had left home. Lucas, deeply affected by the criticism of his cooking at the in-laws, has been cooking more often lately. Watching Lucas improve his cooking skills makes all that commotion feel like a distant memory. Taking care of Dad and Mom is all on you, my dear wife. If you oppose, I'll divorce you and sue for alimony, huh? Could he really believe such an absurd demand would pass? I looked at Georgina, utterly exasperated. Alex stood there boldly, giving me a nasty smirk while looking at me. He must think I would accept his demand. Indeed, I've complied with the requests for the sake of the in-laws, believing it was the right thing to do. Regardless of Alex, I thought those two were good people. But now, having seen Brittany's true nature, I've lost all concern, let alone any sympathy. I smiled back at Alex. All right then. Let's get a divorce.
Don't come crying to me later. Talking back to your husband, what a failure of a wife. Good riddance. Choosing your job over Dad and Mom. Unbelievable.
Oh, my apologies for that.
Exactly. I'd prioritize Dad and Mom over my job any day. Unlike you, who's utterly heartless.
Alex boasted too proudly. Then why didn't he take time off work now? Instead of pushing it onto me, he should just take a break and help out his parents. Blaming and pushing responsibilities onto me without lifting a finger, what a way to shift the blame.
From now on, even if we see each other at work, don't you dare speak to me. I should have chosen a different company.
Alex's parting words pushed me to my limit. Then you're fired.
What? Fired? You're not my boss. What are you on about? Gone mad from the divorce shock?
I couldn't help but reveal a truth Alex was unaware of. I'm Ren, 40 years old. I run an apparel company. I started this company at 26. Having lost my parents early, I motivated myself by setting goals and focusing on achieving them. Decades later, I've dedicated my life to stabilizing the business, working tirelessly. As my friends got married one by one, I didn't even have a boyfriend. There was no time to play. I traveled for work, both domestically and internationally. There were years I don't recall taking any time off. Surrounded by relatives and acquaintances, I was often met with veiled criticism disguised as concern.
Aren't you going to run out of time to have children if you don't hurry up? Is work really that enjoyable for you? Don't you get lonely?
Arguing back would only invite more nagging. So, I took to leaving those situations with a forced smile as quickly as possible. All the effort I poured into my life paid off, and the company's performance steadily improved. Finally, I could afford to take regular breaks and had the luxury to enjoy my personal life. By this time, I was already 38 years old. At this point, I wasn't particularly keen on marriage, but the idea of having a good partner was appealing. That's when I met my husband, Alex. Our meeting was sparked by a soccer game. Suggested by a subordinate, I went to watch a game on a whim and met Alex there, cheering for the same team, and we hit it off. After attending a few games together, we started going out, and then he asked me out. Alex was the same age as me, but seemed remarkably youthful. He had many hobbies, from baseball to video games, manga, and golf, dragging me along to all sorts of activities. Having never really had time to play before, my time with Alex was incredibly exciting and fun. Being my first boyfriend at 38, I was honestly quite thrilled. One day, Alex broached the subject. "Would you meet my parents?"
If I'm going to marry someone, it's going to be Ren. That's why I want to properly introduce you to them.
This was about 2 months into our relationship. Caught off guard, I couldn't refuse, always looking forward to the fun times with Alex. Things went smoothly, and a week later, we visited Alex's parents' house.
Oh my! To be dating such a lovely person, my son is a lucky man.
Indeed. What a wonderful young lady. And for Alex to introduce a girlfriend to us, that's a first. He must be really smitten. Warm and welcoming, Alex's parents showered me with compliments, leaving me flattered and embarrassed throughout the visit. Alex, sitting next to me, smugly commented,
"Right? A catch at 38. Right? A catch at 38.
Though crudely put, it seemed meant as a compliment in Alex's way. With such wonderful parents, I felt we could have a good relationship after marriage. I was relieved the meeting went well. However, I was slightly concerned that Alex referred to his parents as mom and dad. A calling I hadn't often heard from adult men in my circles, which initially surprised me. But considering the differences in each family, I decided not to dwell on it negatively. Alex seemed to have a good relationship with his parents, often praising his mother excessively. While endearing, some aspects felt off-putting at times. Like when the conversation turned to cooking. "What kind of dishes do you excel at, Ren?"
I wouldn't say I excel, but I often cook Western-style meals.
At this, Alex enthusiastically chimed in.
Right. She makes steak a lot. They're edible, but when compared to Mom's cooking. Oh, that's a great idea. Why don't you teach her your recipes?
I understood the comfort of familiar tastes. But his wording left me feeling complex. Unperturbed by my feelings, Alex's mother was delighted.
Well then, I must compile a notebook for Alex's sake.
She was enjoying herself. As we were about to leave, a shocking truth came to light. "When are you two getting married?" asked by Alex's mother. Alex casually replied, causing me to be taken aback.
I'd marry her right now if I could. It'd make life easier, especially since part-time work doesn't pay much. Part-time?
Indeed, when I first met Alex and inquired about his job, he vaguely mentioned something like sales. I too had been vague about my job, saying only something in apparel, as we were still just getting to know each other. Everyone has things they'd rather not discuss. I figured we could talk about it more once we got a bit closer. I had completely forgotten about it, never imagining he was working part-time. Stunned, Alex explained with a frustrated look.
What's with that face? Thinking even at 38? But, you see, there's a good reason for this.
Turns out, Alex's mother has always been frail and prone to sickness. Then, 2 years ago, his father fell ill and needed care. Alex, who was working in sales at a steel company at the time, quit to take care of his father, switching to a more flexible part-time job. Mom alone would have a hard time, right? I just wanted to be there for my parents. I thought it'd be fine to stay part-time for that reason. Alex glanced at his parents and nodded.
Recently, both mom and dad have been in good health, so I'm thinking of getting a full-time job again. I gotta work hard if I'm going to marry Ren.
Hearing about the part-time work, I felt ashamed of my disappointment. Alex had simply prioritized his parents over his job. What a kind and warm person he is. And now, he's thinking of what's best for me. After our conversation, I thought for a moment and then made Alex an offer. If you're interested, why don't you apply to my company?
Eh? Work at the same company as Ren?
Yeah. It's a bit different, but you were in sales before, right? We're actually looking for sales staff right now. I meant well with my suggestion, but Alex visibly grimaced. I'd rather work somewhere I can earn more. I want to make Mom feel secure. Did he think I wasn't earning enough? I explained more about our company. Showing him job listings, I pointed out the salary and holidays, along with other benefits. Alex, who had been skeptically browsing the site, gradually warmed up to the idea.
This might not be too bad after all.
And so, he applied to a position at my company. Fortunately, we were looking to significantly expand our sales department, so Georgina was hired. Pressured somewhat by his parents, we registered our marriage.
Who would have thought we'd end up working at the same company?
Indeed. By the way, which department are you in? It seems Alex still thought of it as just the company I work for, not realizing I'm the owner. I hadn't kept it a secret on purpose, but it felt awkward to bring it up, and I hadn't mentioned it yet. This seemed like a good opportunity, so, with a nervous heart, I was about to reveal the truth. Actually, Alex cut me off with an unexpected remark.
Well, it doesn't matter. I'll probably quit eventually anyway. Eh?
Quit. What did he mean by that? A bad feeling washed over me. Alex glanced at me and laughed, a smile I hadn't seen before. It scared me.
What? You got a problem?
No, it's not a complaint, but what do you mean? I'm not planning to quit my job now. Oh, unless we have kids. But my company offers maternity and paternity leave. Kids are out of the question. We're already busy with Dad and Mom. Dad and Mom? As I tilted my head, Alex mimicked me mockingly. Yeah, my parents. Didn't I say they need care? Rosalind? I heard, but you said they've been doing well lately. That's why you re-entered the workforce, right?
Even if they're doing well, they're still elderly, aren't they? Aren't you worried at all? Or what? As a wife, are you planning to shirk that responsibility?
I couldn't grasp what Alex was trying to say, feeling bewildered. I needed to clear my head and sort things out. Alex was trying to push the responsibility of caregiving onto me. And from how he spoke, it seemed he eventually planned to have me quit my job to prioritize caregiving. I'm not saying you should quit right away. Having two incomes helps financially. For now, just come back to the family home with me on our days off. What is that supposed to mean? I wasn't completely unprepared for the caregiving conversation. I had intended to help out, and I had thought that I could be of assistance in the future. But I never imagined being expected to return to my in-laws' house every holiday, eventually being burdened with caregiving responsibilities. What surprised me most was Alex's attitude. Before marriage, he was positive and reliable, but he changed drastically as soon as we got married. Is this person really Alex? I didn't want to believe it. This isn't the person I wanted to marry. I wanted to escape from reality by closing my eyes tightly, but Alex's angry voice relentlessly broke through.
Listen, you're my wife. Don't defy me. Got it?
I was so shocked by the change that I couldn't agree or disagree. I wish I hadn't married at all if I knew this would happen. Regret filled my mind, and the word divorce quickly followed. Society might frown upon a divorce so soon after getting married. But that seemed less important than wasting time with someone unpleasant. I prepared the divorce papers right away. The issue was the reason for divorce and the in-laws. The reason for divorce could be managed somehow. If necessary, I could even involve a lawyer. But the in-laws were a bigger concern. As Alex declared, we started visiting his parents' house on our days off. I was reluctant to go because Alex treated me poorly. But his parents were overjoyed every time we visited.
I'm sorry for making you come here on your day off.
No, it's okay. Brittany, teary-eyed with joy, made it impossible for me to rudely decline their hospitality. Every visit, they prepared my favorite sweets, telling me how much they appreciated it. Though I disliked being controlled by Alex, seeing Brittany happy made it difficult to bring up divorce, and time passed. By 2 months into our marriage, Georgina and I had started visiting his family home separately. Our days off just didn't align anymore. Initially, I had forced myself to adjust to Alex's schedule. Meanwhile, I had kept it a secret that I was the president of the company. The Alex before our marriage might have been fine, but revealing this to the current Alex would only invite trouble. Although it would be easy to find out if he looked into it, luckily, Alex seemed oblivious. Alex was a source of concern both as a husband and as an employee, causing numerous problems at work. I wanted to resolve the issues at work quickly and get a divorce. But what about Brittany? Despite everything, I didn't want to upset them. Torn, I headed to my in-laws' house as usual. Lately, I had become accustomed to entering the house without waiting to be invited. Today, as always, I opened the door and took off my shoes. That's when I heard a familiar voice from the back. Undoubtedly, it was Alex's voice. He was supposed to work today, but perhaps his schedule had changed. Feeling awkward, I walked down the hall and was about to enter the living room when I overheard their conversation.
That person, she's not very considerate, is she? And her housekeeping is subpar. She's earnest, but couldn't you find someone better?
Indeed, it was Brittany's voice. However, the tone was so full of malice, unlike anything I had heard from her before. It sounded like something out of a movie, so spiteful and unlike the Brittany I knew. Yet, it was unmistakably Brittany's voice. Despite all the praise she had given me, the thought of the gentle Brittany saying such things tightened my chest. I didn't want to hear any more, but my legs felt too heavy to move.
Sorry, Mom. But, you know, she's tall, so she might be able to carry you if necessary. With a bit of training, she could become more useful.
Well, for now, she's pleasant and financially supportive, so I suppose that's acceptable. We're hoping for potential, I guess. Alex and Brittany were laughing carelessly as they spoke. As I listened, my heart pounded with the realization that they were talking about me. Georgina's constant complaints were one thing, but I was shocked to discover Brittany's hidden side. Brittany, who always seemed so grateful, who would lower their head in thanks repeatedly, making me feel almost guilty. We shared laughs over snacks and meals I had cooked. Regardless of Alex's intentions, I thought I had a good relationship with Brittany. I had hesitated on divorce partly because of Brittany. Yet, according to their conversation, I was merely a caregiving resource for Brittany as well. Brittany then added insult to injury with this remark. For now, I'll keep praising her and egging her on. She looks so foolishly happy then. Alex, you should learn from me. A fool and his scissors are easily parted, as they say. Hearing this, I left the house as if fleeing. After calming myself down a bit, I contacted Alex and his family.
I'm going to be busy for a while and won't be able to visit or contact you.
I'll reach out again later. Despite multiple calls from both Alex and his family, I ignored them all. Alex's angry messages were even recorded on the voicemail.
Do you think you can trouble Mom like this? Apologize to her in person right now. You don't have the right to refuse.
As if anyone would comply after being spoken to like that. Naturally, I ignored this too. At work, I made sure not to run into Alex and started staying at a hotel after hours. During this time, I methodically prepared for divorce. Then, one day when preparations were sufficiently in place, I was finally caught by Georgina, who had been lying in wait at the office.
Hey! Ren!
Upon spotting me, Georgina looked like he was about to grab me but restrained himself, likely due to the presence of others. I decided to move the conversation to an empty conference room to talk with Alex.
I've been looking for you. What do you think you're doing? How many times have I called you? Do you have any idea how much I've been searching for you?
Alex was clearly furious. His breath was heavy, and his eyes, bloodshot and glaring, seemed to curse me with every look. As soon as we entered the room, he approached me with heavy footsteps. Then, standing right in front of me, he aggressively grabbed my wrist.
Let go! I told you on the phone, didn't I? I'll contact you when I've calmed down.
Is there anything more important to you than my dad and mom?
Do you realize how lonely you've made them feel by not being there?
Lonely? They were talking behind my back, and yet he dares to complain. I trembled with anger. I wished I could shut him up right there and hurl at him the worst insults I could think of. But I was too agitated to articulate my thoughts properly, so all I could do was grit my teeth and glare at Alex. Taking advantage of my silence, Alex continued.
Poor them, right? Even now, they're hungry because there's no food at home. Forget work today. You should just go back home.
Don't you dare tell me what to do with my work. You're not a child, and caregiving doesn't mean you can't move. It's about time you stopped being so dependent. I shook off Alex's hand and yelled.
I have an important meeting later today. There's no way I can just take off. And if it's so important, you should take a day off and go yourself.
There was no need for me to sacrifice so much for such people. Throwing away important work for them? Alex probably never expected me to fight back. He staggered back, surprised.
You're talking back to me. A wife's place is too.
I've been thinking, your values are skewed.
What do you mean a wife's place? They're your parents, aren't they? Shouldn't you be taking care of them instead of pushing it onto someone else?
Indeed, Alex's work today was supposed to be just preparing documents and meetings in the office. The document preparation could be rescheduled, and the meetings could be rearranged if he asked others, without causing much inconvenience. If Brittany was so important, he should be the one to take time off. If he won't, it shows how little they matter to him. Yet he dares to blame and try to control me. Such a convenient mama's boy. Disgusting.
What? That's ridiculous. Why should I, the husband, have to bow my head and skip work just to clean up after my wife?
Clean up what exactly?
It's time to make things clear. Listen up. Taking care of my parents is your job as my wife. If you can't do that, you're worthless as a wife.
Alex launched into a tirade, puffing up his chest with rough breaths, as if trying to intimidate me. Was he trying to scare me? He seemed like some playground bully. Not scary at all. What even is the value of a wife? Why do I have to be evaluated?
So, what exactly do you want from me? I asked, my voice laced with a sigh.
Alex snorted derisively.
Taking care of Dad and Mom is all on you, my dear wife. If you oppose, I'll divorce you and sue for alimony, huh?
Could he seriously believe such an absurd demand would fly? I looked at Alex, utterly dumbfounded, but there he was, standing tall and proud, giving me a nasty smirk. He must think I'd comply with his demand after becoming attached to Brittany. Indeed, I had been accommodating to the in-laws, thinking it was for the best. Regardless of Alex, I thought those two were good people. But now, having seen Brittany's true colors, I couldn't care less, let alone feel any sympathy. I smiled back at Alex.
All right then. Let's get a divorce.
Huh? Alex sounded completely taken aback.
Do you even understand what you're saying?
Yes.
I can't be the wife you want. So, let's get a divorce, shall we? If you want to sue for alimony, go ahead. Whether you'll get it is another matter, though.
I pulled out the divorce papers from my bag and handed them to Georgina. I had been keeping them on hand ever since I considered divorce.
Are you serious? Do you realize what you're doing?
Yes.
Please, sign them quickly.
Alex froze, seemingly in disbelief. Seeing his hesitation, I said,
Oh, you're not divorcing? Just talk, then?
Which made him furiously scribble his signature on the papers. After reviewing the signed document, everything was in order. I immediately handed it over to my secretary to file.
Well, we're strangers now.
As I stated matter-of-factly, Alex spat out.
You'll regret this. Talking back to your husband, what a failure of a wife. Good riddance. Choosing your job over Dad and Mom. Unbelievable. Oh, my apologies for that. Exactly. Even if I lost my job, I'd prioritize Dad and Mom. I'm not heartless like you.
Alex said this with too much pride. Then why didn't he take time off now? Instead of pushing it onto me, he should just take a break and help out his parents. Blaming me while he just complains is just passing the buck.
From now on, even if we see each other at work, don't talk to me. I should have chosen a different company.
Alex's parting shot pushed me to my limit.
Then you're fired.
I believe it was the coldest voice I've ever used. Alex stopped in his tracks and turned around and puzzled.
Huh?
Dismissed? You're not my boss. Have you gone mad from the divorce shock? Alex laughed, perhaps thinking it was a joke. I sighed softly and fixed my gaze on Georgina. When our eyes met, Alex flinched, looking at me. Anxiously, bracing for what was to come. I inhaled deeply and spoke calmly.
The funny one is you. You don't even recognize the face of your own company's president?
Huh? No, that can't be. Alex's mouth twitched as he pulled out his smartphone and started searching. As he stared at the screen, the color drained from his face. He must have finally realized who I was.
You're the president of this company?
Finally caught on, have you? Alex knelt down and bowed his head to me, his voice trembling pitifully.
It's not like that, Ren. I didn't know.
Not know? No, you chose not to know, didn't you? I never brought it up, but there were plenty of opportunities for him to find out. A simple search on his phone would have revealed my name, if not my photo. It was typical of Alex. He probably never had any interest. A man without particular concern for the content of his work, focusing solely on income and time off. That's why his work performance has always been subpar. To you, I was merely an afterthought, wasn't I? What you and your parents truly desired was a diligent, hardworking wife. Someone to take care of them, anyone would do, right? Alex, mouth agape, shook his head, his face turning a ghastly shade of pale.
Not at all. Had I known you were the president, I would never have expected you to shoulder the caregiving. I would have taken care of Dad and Mom myself, allowing you to concentrate on your work. With sufficient funds, one could easily hire assistants. You'd have me earn while outsourcing caregiving to professionals, and you'd merely enjoy life, right?
Alex, with a faint smile, whispered, I wouldn't do something so terrible. Indeed, had Alex navigated things more adeptly, such a future might have been attainable. Had he proposed this before I discovered his parents' true nature, I would have agreed without hesitation. I'll earn so you can dedicate yourself to caregiving. I believe he would have sincerely said that. If Alex and his parents not shown their true colors after marriage, such a future could have been plausible. He squandered that opportunity by his own doing. Alex looked up at me, eyes seemingly moist, with a plea.
Please, Ren! Can't we start over? We had good times, didn't we? Let's visit all those places again.
True, you always took me to places I never knew. Every place you took me was indeed fun. A glimmer of hope shone in Alex's face.
Right? So, if that's the case.
However, that was merely you donning a mask to get married. Life with you post-marriage was profoundly disappointing. That is. I wonder if the divorce papers have been processed by now. Well, I must prepare for a meeting. Regarding the dismissal, I'll contact you later. You may leave for today. I packed my belongings, waved flippantly at Alex, and reached for the door. But before I could open it, Alex grasped my left hand. Turning around, I faced Alex's glare. I glared back and simply asked,
Anything else?
Anything else?
This isn't over. Suddenly deciding on a divorce, then revealing you're the president, and now a dismissal. I can't just accept this. It's all too arbitrary on your part.
The divorce was initiated by you.
You didn't expect me to agree to it. Moreover, you should have properly informed me that you were the president.
It appears Alex had planned to use the divorce as leverage to control me. The revelation of my presidency must have been a shock to him. Blaming others and shirking responsibility onto his wife. Such actions are unbecoming of an adult. It's absurd that I had to set everything up for him, yet he never questioned it. He's always lived by blaming others. I'm at a loss for words from sheer disbelief. Alex is grinding his back teeth, seemingly regretting letting go of his financial support, but that's not my concern. Isn't that too self-serving? Blaming me for your lack of planning and ignorance isn't fair, I said, causing Alex's face to flush red as he yelled back in a strained voice.
Coward! How can the president of such a large company justify firing an employee for personal gain? That's unacceptable. Such tyranny won't be tolerated.
Alex postured as if he had the moral high ground. His thinking is too immature. Always believing he's in the right. Can he not comprehend what's been said? I couldn't help but hold my head in my hands. Seeing me like this, Alex, thinking he had won, smirked triumphantly.
See? I hit the nail on the head. Should I bring this to light? You'd be the one in trouble.
I'm astounded by your foolishness. If it comes out, you're the one who'll suffer. What are you talking about? I cut Alex off, listing names. General Affairs Hoyt, Sales Gracelyn, Winter, and Accounting's Paisley. Who else was there? When I asked Alex, he began sweating profusely and looking away.
What? What are you talking about?
You know very well. I just named female employees you've been persistently harassing. They've come to me seeking help. Most employees don't know Alex is my husband. Only my secretary is aware. Among them, I received complaints like, "I'm troubled by the constant invitations from sales Alex." At first, I doubted my ears. My own husband was hitting on multiple young female employees. And despite their rejections, he kept coming back. I was mortified and apologetic beyond words.
I was just trying to foster camaraderie among employees,
Alex defended. By specifically targeting women over a decade younger than you? And inviting them to hotels? What kind of camaraderie were you trying to build? There were messages sent from Alex to these women, undeniable proof. No matter what Alex said, there was no escaping it. You're not only underperforming, but you're also a nuisance to others. It's my job as president to remove those who are detrimental to the company, isn't it? But that's right. And from accounting, there's a report that you might be fudging expenses. What about that? Surely, you wouldn't stoop so low, would you? Alex averted his eyes and fell silent. Regrettably, it seems that was true as well. A mama's boy, a womanizer, and on top of that, a miser. Moreover, to think he caused trouble not just for me but for others too, it's disappointing not just as a husband but as a person. I'm disillusioned by my lack of judgment in not seeing him for what he was. Feeling inept for not having seen through such a person. I'll make sure all suspicions are cleared up before proceeding with the dismissal, so rest assured. Well, I'm leaving now. You better get along with your parents back home. Alex collapsed on the spot. Slumped over, muttering something under his breath. He must have realized it was all too late. Even as I reached for the door, Alex, now devoid of energy, didn't say anything more, and I left the room. Upon further investigation, all suspicions against Alex were confirmed. After making Alex apologize to the affected female employees, he resigned voluntarily, taking responsibility. Now jobless, Alex returned to live with his parents at home. A while later, he attempted to start working again part-time, but then something unexpected happened to Alex. Until now, though former Rosalind needed care, former Brittany was essentially able to manage daily tasks on her own. Thanks to this, Alex only had to help out occasionally. However, former Brittany has recently started showing signs of dementia, including instances of wandering at night. A father who physically requires care and a mother who is usually fine but occasionally shows symptoms of dementia.
I just can't find peace anymore. We're running out of money too. Please help.
I received a plea for help from Alex, indicating he was at his limit. If our divorce had been amicable and there were no hard feelings towards my former in-laws, I might have been inclined to help. But these were the people who had looked down on me as nothing more than a caregiver. There's no room for sympathy. It sounds tough, but I'm afraid I cannot offer any assistance. Furthermore, as we are now strangers, I kindly ask that you refrain from contacting me further. Depending on the situation, I may have to take appropriate actions. After conveying this, I no longer received any messages from Alex. After divorcing Alex, I had decided I was done with marriage and resolved to live alone. However, just when I had settled on this, someone I had known for many years through work confessed his feelings to me. The trauma from Alex made me consider declining, but knowing this person's sincerity from our long acquaintance, I gratefully accepted the offer to start dating. Whether this will lead to marriage, I'm uncertain, and part of me doubts, fearing a change post-marriage, but this person is the most gentle individual I've ever met. Moreover, since he is also a business owner, we can share and understand each other's work. Unlike with Alex, he truly feels like a partner should. If I can spend the future with him, this happiness I feel now will surely continue. Hoping for such a future, I continue to work hard today.